Before we begin this chapter, I should note that it is going to be focused on why we made some decisions in the previous chapters, a bit like a code review. The idea is to get a better understanding of our code and why we wrote it that way. Additionally, we are going to introduce some changes in it as an exercise of sorts in order to get a better idea of how to maintain and edit our code. First off, we are going to take a better look at using CoffeeScript with jQuery. Because we are using a lot of jQuery to perform DOM manipulation, inject our templates and bind events, it makes sense to begin with it. Let's take a look at the file that initiates the application. Aside from declaring our global namespaces, which are later used by our classes and controller initialization, there is the function that binds click events to the links in the sidebar. As we mentioned at the start of the course, CoffeeScript is just JavaScript. The way we bind the click event isn't a lot different to how we do it in JavaScript. It's simpler and less noisy, which allows for greater readability. What happens in the function is the following. First, we catch when an A element is clicked in the sidebar. We prevent the default behavior of the link because we don't want it to take us to a different page. If you recall from our index.html file, the href attribute in the links corresponds to a route from our router class. However, if we don't prevent their default behavior, the browser will simply treat them as links and navigate elsewhere. After we override the default behavior, we simply extract the href attribute from the current target property of the event. The current target property is in fact the element we clicked in this case. Wrapping it in the $function allows us to treat it as any other jQuery wrapped DOM element and access its attributes easily. Last, we trigger the route by executing router.call with the route we extracted from the URL element. Our per-view events are bound in a similar manner to this, but we'll review them a bit later. The view layer is where the on-screen interactions happens. We'll go through a couple of examples of the event binding code we wrote in the previous chapter. The simplest example of this is the document listView class. We should take note of the bind method. Similar to what happens in the app.coffee file, we have a root element that contains a number of li elements. The behavior we want when clicking one of these elements is to open a document it represents for viewing. To achieve this, we refer to the addElement variable, which contains a jQuery wrapped version of the root element of our application. We can find each of our li elements by using the find method in jQuery. That provides us with a list of all matching elements to which we can attach an event. Clicking in our case. As the li element has no default behavior associated with click, we have no need of preventing anything, as was the case in app.coffee. We then extract the data ID attribute of the li element that was clicked and pass it to the controller to trigger some action. The data ID attribute is actually a unique identifier for that particular document and is the equivalent of the ID attribute of a document model. Prepending it with data in the DOM is to avoid confusion with the actual ID attribute of HTML, as well as keeping our markup valid. Please note that data attributes are also part of the browser specification, not simply a convention we are using. In other words, those attributes are considered valid by HTML5 validation tools. Now, on to something more complex, the document editor view. Document editor and document item have similar event bindings, so going through one of them should be enough to gain a firm understanding of the event binding process. Again, the bind method is what we focus on. The thought process is similar to what we did in the document list view, with one notable difference, the presence of multiple types of action. We have the save and close buttons, which have different behavior. As the name implies, we filter these through a switch statement, probing their data action attribute for a hint on what they are supposed to do when clicked. Following that, they perform their associated action. On top of that, the document item view has one more method, the delete method. The reasoning is the same in there. In fact, we'll be able to add more buttons as needed using this approach. And we will extend our application with more buttons and functionality in the following chapters. What's important here is to understand the thought process behind the decisions we make related to events. Next up, we'll take a look at global events and using an event library in our application to make things a lot simpler.